All right, so welcome everybody back to another Venue, a live sound webinar today. Today we are going to be talking about streaming and in a little presentation we put together here called Streaming Services for Houses of Worship. I'll give away the punchline a little bit though ahead of time and just say, while this is going to be absolutely focused on streaming for church services and houses of worship, et cetera, a lot of what we talk about today is going to be applicable out in the secular world, in concert sound and clubs, all this other stuff as well. It applies there. It's no secret to anybody that we've been racing towards streaming for the last year or so, and the churches really, funny enough, have laid a lot of the groundwork to get this all together, and the concert industry, et cetera, is going to be very well served by these folks digging in and figuring a lot of this out while they were still in process. So it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about this today. So just a reminder now, once we get going here, you can ask questions in the chat. Use the Q&A button, I believe, is what you need to do to ask questions. I got people in the background here, Chant Peck, a couple other people in the background that can answer questions for you. Any questions that they can't answer or that you might want to direct directly to our guests today, go ahead and feed those to them as well. And then at the end of the session, we'll pull back for some more Q&A. Okay, so that said, let me just kind of go over what we're going to talk about today, and then I'm going to invite in our guest. So we are going to talk about three kind of tiers of streaming today. There's three kind of approaches to streaming. The first one we're going to talk about is front of house mix streamed, where it's really just a front of house mix added with audience and ambience, and then streamed out, added with your video content and streamed out. This has been, honestly, we've been doing this kind of thing for a long time. All the way back to days that we were recording services on cassette and handing them out. I mean, it's a similar style process here, but this can actually work really good under the right circumstances. So that's one we're going to talk about and demonstrate today. The second is we're going to talk about front of house stems. And by stems, of course, I mean groups of inputs that have been pre-mixed. And then we're going to allow those to be remixed and reblended, possibly by a second console, a second engineer, and then added to your stream, to your video stream. And then finally, the Mac Daddy, which is a full discrete on-air mix and remix for on demand, right? You have the ability to not only mix to air, but you also have the ability to come back and do sweetening and overdubs if you want to do it before you put it up on demand. Okay, so that's what we're going to try to cover today in this amount of time. All of that said, I'm going to invite in our first guest here. He's going to be with us the whole time, which is Matt Wheeler with Epic Resource Group. He's going to come in here, and he's been kind of promoting these three topologies in a lot of his designs, et cetera. So welcome, Matt. Good to have you here. How
nice
are
to
you,
be
my
here.
friend?
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's nice to reconnect with you a little bit. It's been a little while since you and I have spoken, and it was nice to come kind of pull this back together and get back together again and talk about some of this stuff.
Yeah, it's been good. Good.
Nice. Okay, so obviously you've been doing this kind of thing for a little while. I'm sure, as with a lot of people that are doing installations, et cetera, a lot of companies installations, I'm betting you've had a banner year over the past year of kind of helping churches, et cetera, get this kind of thing together for them. Because, it was just an absolute survival mechanism to keep going, right?
Yeah, it was super interesting. Like, people have been streaming, but a lot of times that's been going on in the background. And, from a church perspective, the pastor may or may not ever listen to that. And we had lots of people going, hey, we really need to make this better. But it never really got that much attention. COVID hit, and really what started happening is a lot of the worship leaders they were doing their services during the week and then streaming them on the weekends. So a worship leader, a musician, would go in, track the thing, mix it, and then put it out there. Well, everybody went, hey, that sounds really great. Well, then it started opening back up. People started going back in the services, and the pastors and the worship leaders were going, hey, how come it doesn't sound like it used to, so we got lots of calls to, hey, how do we make this better? You know, everything from full broadcast mix with building rooms and everything else that goes along with it. So it's actually been a crazy year. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept where you're trying to get, a live on-air thing to compete with or sound as good as something that's been in post and, had every attention to detail, and then put out, that can be kind of a tall order at times, depending on your infrastructure, depending on the people you got involved.
Right.
So yeah, that can put a lot of challenges on it.
No, but
sure.
the nice thing is it can be done at a very high level.
Yeah. No, I think we're going to prove that today, hopefully. So, all of that said, let's bring in our first guest here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. We're going to talk about 3 churches that are Epic Resource clients. Is that right? That you guys have worked with?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to bring in Wes Ashworth here. He is the manager of production at a place called the Village Church. And he and Matt are going to walk us through the first scenario that we talked about, which these guys are doing very effectively. And that is the concept of using an FOH mix, using an actual FOH mix as your stream mix, right?
Yeah, and full disclosure, I go to the Village and I actually mix there as well. So
thank you for being upfront about that, Matt. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm pretty spoiled having him around. So
nice. Well, I guess where do we start here? I think one of the things that is probably, I hope, readily apparent to everybody who's tuning in here and buying into what we're saying here right off the gate is, wow, if we're going to take a front of house mix and use it as our stream mix, add it to the video content, etc. I mean, how do I do that? What are all the things that are in play there to allow me to actually do that and have it sound good, because there can be a lot of things that can work against you there doing that sort of thing, kind of depending on the size of the room, depending on the quality of the room and the PA system, it's
right.
So,
and I was going to say, I mean, if you're talking straight to mix, and what we're doing is we'll kind of go into what we're doing. It's not the music part of it is a straight to mix. We're doing some other things with talking heads, all the speech, and then also something a little bit different with audience.
Yeah. But
I mean, you have to have a room that acoustically can support what you're doing. You have to have a PA that's well tuned, that's linear, that actually will translate out of that room.
Yeah.
And then just a few little things and the interesting thing is, when we go back and look at our streams, we'll go back and tweak. And you go, oh, well, you don't want the stream to dictate what's going on in the room. But I'll say the stuff that we've made changes has almost always helped the room, especially in the low end when you're talking about, usually PA has some type of slope to it, right? But getting things to translate onto smaller speakers translates through the entire room better.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you're talking my language now. I mean, I've been promoting this concept for so long now. I mean, honestly, since the 80s, kind of promoting this idea of the better you can get the mix sounding coming off of your console, the better it's going to sound coming through a PA system.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's one of those kind of fringe benefits that's come from this kind of awakened focus on streaming, which is really you're focused on how good the output of the console sounds, right? And you kind of dive in, and the more problems you sort out, all of a sudden that room starts to sound a little bit better, and things start, matching up better on those things. It's, before we had FFT analyzers, it was print your mix on a cassette and listen to what you were doing. I mean, it was that kind of thing. So.
Well, and when I get calls and go, hey, our stream doesn't sound good, well, then I go, well, what's your PA doing? What's the room doing? And then who's the guy that sounds horrible, but like, is the guy at front of house, does he know how to mix? Does he have, that's usually probably not your streaming. It's something else that's going on before that you have out of balance,
Yeah.
And we have a lot of places that to mix, or what we call a compensated mix, which is basically an aux driven mix that is just straight faders where you can make some tweaks for talking heads. Man, most of our rooms, they come out and I think I was telling you earlier, we had a facility that started out with multiple consoles and ended up doing it all on one because their 2 mix was so much better than they could ever get out of their broadcast guy because they couldn't afford to have that really legit broadcast engineer.
Right.
What they were getting off of their 2 mix was way better than they could get out of their broadcast.
Yeah, it's interesting, that concept of the augmented 2 mix, because it's one thing if you're in a space that is big enough to allow you to put all the instrumentation in the PA system.
Right.
I mean, honestly, this is where this whole move towards silent stage is really going to help churches in their streaming, right? But places where you have a very live stage and you end up doing, it's way more difficult, even in a smaller room where there's, where you're doing sound reinforcement now, right? Where not everything is in the PA system. It kind of flips broadcast on its head, where it does a mix plus, right? It's an augmented mix plus, where there are things in the stream that are not in the PA.
Well, that's also having to know what your client's doing, because if you're in a small room and they have live drums on the stage, that you may not have overheads or hi-hat, or, and you're just giving some foundation to a snare drum, then you're probably not going to want to be doing something off of your, off your console, unless you're going to do something in the background. That's probably not going to go well for you. And, my encouragement would get the stage under control, because the audience will be happier too. But at that point, you probably have to go to one of the other more complicated systems.
Yeah, you almost got to pick your poison there of what you're going to fix, right? Am I going to make the stage in the room better, or am I going to hire somebody in to do discrete broadcast mix, right? I mean, that's really your choices at that point.
Well, with Wes, so what we're doing there, and I'll kind of let him take over some of this, but we're actually doing a 2 mix of music, and then we've got stem mixes of, correct me if I'm wrong, Wes, of speech, then playback and audience. Is that correct?
And we've added in a baptismal group as well, since we keep the cap open pretty much all the time now.
Right. And that's a unique challenge for them. The baptismal area is in front of the PA. It's maybe 20 feet away from it. and the mics are facing the PA. So what we have to do in the room to make it even loud enough to even hear, we don't want having that going to the stream. So that's actually broken up into multiple subgroups. So
one group is wrung out, and then the other group is dry, just gets the high pass filter essentially off the shotgun, and that goes to our stream.
Right. But so all
are you adding all of this together in a matrix that is sending out to the stream? Is that the idea?
Yep.
Have you got the ability to pull that up there, Matt, or Wes, where we can have a look at it?
Let me switch over.
That'd be cool to look at.
Y'all may want to blow up my screen here. If you can pin it.
Pin you, here.
Yeah.
And this is actually a combination of 2 things, because we're also having to matrix those things to the PA as well, because those are broken up. So those stems go to the PA and to the broadcast separately.
Yeah, in this window, this is our what I call our video world matrix. This is how we send our audio from the front of house position to basically, we have a TF1 in video world that I use as a router, essentially an audio router. And so this LR is our 2-bus mix of just worship. It's nothing other than the band and vocals. Then we have a dialogue group over here that gets all of our talking heads, handhelds, face mics, that kind of stuff. And then I have a crowd mix here that is a bus, an aux send, that I'm sending post fader to this matrix here, so that way I can use some on console event automation to blend up and down, and that helps us get around the need for writing a fader manually. So essentially, if I pull up a talking head fader, I have an event that says, okay, if the fader is unmuted and above this level on the meter, it's going to fade up that aux send by 5 dB or whatever it is that I have it turned up to. And then when I pull that fader back down, not muted, just down, it then puts it back to our worship room level of crowd send. And then from there, I have a playback that's video playback. Maybe we have an interview we play in service, or pre-service, videos, whatever that looks like. That's playback. And then this is our baptismal group right here, that we send over as well.
Looks good. So, so how are you? Matter of fact, it would be great if we could have a look at that event as well.
Sure.
Can you engage that event and let us see the action as well?
Yeah, I can do that. Let me pull up the event real quick, and that way I can show you how we're accomplishing it, and then I'll show it to you in action. So over here, I have these events called Crowd Dialogue Up, and then I have 1 through 8. So I've got, at any given moment, I have 8 dialogue channels ready to go on the console that I can patch in and bring up. So if I pull up this number 1, here's how we're doing it. It's an and statement. So it says when this channel is unmuted and above -10, then it's going to do this down here, which it says crowd video or crowd aux fader up to -8 over the course of 10 seconds. So it's fading at 10 seconds, so, excuse me, 6 seconds. And the way that would look, I'll pull up, you guys got my overhead console view here?
We do.
Okay, here is where I have our crowds landed. I'm going to attention over here a dialogue microphone. So here's our pastor mic. So that way you can see me unmute and push up, but then you can watch over here. These are the individual crowd inputs, and this is the bus right here. So if I unmute this channel, and then I bring this up above 10, then you'll see this fader start to move. And so that's essentially over that 6 seconds, bringing that up. So when we cross from worship to speaking, so if they're praying and then he says amen, we toss over to our pastor, and then I will do that. And then on the back end, you just hear that, and you don't even really notice it. It's gradual enough that it kind of comes in naturally. And, you know, anyone I feel like would know that with a face mic, you get so much room tone anyway that it kind of all blends together really, really well. With the amount of compression we have to have on our pastor as well, because I can get him up to 82 dB in the room easy. It just kind of all blends together. And then the idea here is, if I pull it back, I'm not going to mute it because we are going to broadcast. I don't want to hard mute anything because you'll just hear that. I will fade him back out. And then this comes back down to that level at negative, where it lands, -13 is where I have it. And then I'll mute later just to ensure I don't bring him back up. And so it's a pretty straightforward setup. It's not anything wild, but it accomplishes our ability to get around having a body, you know, do all that switching on the back end. And yeah, it just kind of translates really well, actually. And I would even argue that in most instances when we're down in worship, you can hear the audience pretty well with that vocal and kind of more intimate moments. So,
and the reason behind that is because we're changing the mix going to video from what's in the room. The blend, you know, in general, you're not going to have, if we're mixing at 93, well, you don't want his vocal at 93, right?
Right.
So if we set our audience levels so that we have a good response with any of the speech, well, then when you bring your music in, it's going to wash it out because you've changed the levels between what's in the room and what's going to video. So that was just a way to adjust for that difference between, you know, that we've made in the mix between speech and music.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, it not necessarily obvious to anybody who's listening, but, you know, that is something that needs to happen. Even if you're mixing music at concert, you know, the difference between someone speaking between songs and the audience and ambience levels that you would have while the band is playing to your two-track outputs, they're different, and you need to write them, right? So, you know, I think it kind of speaks to that concept of you need a skilled person here to be able to do this. Somebody who can mentally manage two things going on here, where you're mixing to the stream and you're also mixing for the room, right? There's two different things. And you know, it kind of brings me to a question there, Wes and Matt. You know, given that you're kind of doing this blindly, because you're not necessarily monitoring the stream there, how long did it take you to set this up? I mean, were you using virtual sound check to kind of prep it and get it kind of tweaked in?
Yeah, a little bit here and there. So at the beginning of COVID, we started off where I essentially set up some studio monitors. We turned our room into a sound stage at the beginning of COVID.
Yeah.
And as we started to re-implement in-person services, we had to figure out a way to take that sound stage mentality and turn it back to, well, we knew the two bus was good enough. And so we just had to figure out a way to manage all of that. And the conversation from our worship guy was literally, hey, can you ride the fader? And I was like, well, I can't necessarily do that in the moment, nor do I want to sacrifice my attention in the room to a crowd fader and pull my creative ability and then also ability to follow you off of my thought process. And so the creative solution was that. And it just took trial and error, honestly. So we spent probably the better part of a month just kind of going back and forth, listening to the mix in our video world on the Genelecs we have mounted on our walls. I pulled a pair of Avintones out here and listened, like those that has that kind of paper NS10 effect, and listened to it on there just to hear what the raw crowd mix felt like compared to the dialogue and to the music, and kind of found a good level to blend it into, but in a scenario where there's no pressure trying to figure it out, and just trial and error it into these two levels that we found.
Yeah,
and that works well for us.
I'll say a lot of times I'm watching this, especially now the live stream. I'm watching it, and so I'll text him and go. I mean, most of the time it's like, hey, it sounds really good, whatever. But especially in the beginning, there were little things of going, hey, this isn't translating as well. We need to look into that this week. So hey, I'm not always there, but I'm usually trying to. If I'm at home watching the stream,
I think it's safe to say that having the events programming available to you on the console is kind of key to making this work, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, that's one of those great features on S6L. I mean, events is just such an amazing thing to have at your disposal, especially for things like this.
Yep.
Well, that's very cool, man. That is really good. So, obviously there's some pluses and minuses to all of this, as I'm kind of preaching all the times, audio is all about managing your trade-offs. So in this situation, these guys were obviously able to manage this, have somebody capable enough at the front of house position, and I obviously working with Matt to make this happen. This begs another question. I'll just throw this at you, Wes. I just want to make sure of this, because I'm not positive of this. You're not mixing monitors from there as well, right? You're just
actually we are.
So you're doing monitors, FOH, and stream from the console there then?
Yeah, all of it's housed here. I'm double landing a good amount of inputs to remove, my processing for the FOH mix, so that way they're getting something a little more true to what they need off the stage. And we're using a system called Live Mix. It's a Dante-enabled 24-channel system. Glorified Avioms, if you will, for people who aren't familiar with it. And so that's how we're doing that. So they're mixing their monitors personally from the stage.
Great.
But it is all housed at the front of house console.
So again, I mean, you got your hands full, right? Okay. So now you need to be stream mixing as well. So we're going to put that on your shoulders as well. So, again, it just drives home, you need somebody capable there, right? This is not something you would turn over to somebody unexperienced to say, hey, go make this happen, right?
Or would have extensive training from us prior to jumping in that seat. Yeah.
Right. So, just to kind of recap this, I'll take the stance of recapping it here, Matt. If there's stuff you want to add, by all means.
Oh, the only thing I was going to say is there is some mastering stuff going on that matrix going out that we're doing. Little bits of things. There's slight amount of EQ brightening things up a little bit from what's in the room, and we've got like an SSL bus compressor and
some leveling, that kind of stuff.
So
right. Some peak limiting, etc. Great. Yep. That all sounds normal to me. So, with this kind of thing, if you're at your church and you're thinking about doing this, obviously keep in mind the person that you're going to need to do this and what you're going to put on their shoulders, especially if they're mixing front of house and monitors. But this obviously requires the least amount of technology addition, right? There's no additional infrastructure per se, short of getting to the stream. And no additional personnel needed. So that's a big plus for a lot of places to get going on this. And, I think maybe the way we want to position all of this that we're going to talk about today is that these can be growth stages for you, right? You can start out at one, grow to the next, and grow to the next, depending, as your needs change, right? And I think we've seen that happen over the past year or so where, previous to the focus on streaming, it's great, we're streaming, it sounds pretty good. But now that when streaming was the only access for the congregation or the customers, now all of a sudden it was like, hey, not only do we hear, but this has to sound good now. We got to be able to get this across. So it changed the focus on it a little bit.
Yeah, well, for sure, doing a 2-mix, your front of house guy he's got to have his stuff together. So.
Yeah. Well, let's see here. should we move on to the next time? Oh, yeah, we probably should, given the time here. So the next one we're going to talk about, actually, I missed pulling up some pictures here, but I'll do it on the next one. The next one we're going to talk about is stem mixing, right? We're going to talk about where you're taking actual pre-mixed groups of instrumentations and vocals and delivering them to another mixing device and possibly another mixing person. And they are going to handle the stream blend for you, right? So let me switch back over to screen share here. I'll just run through a couple of photos here. So this is the Village Church. This is where you guys were, right, Wes? This is your place?
Correct.
Yeah, that's front of house. And it's probably worth noting too, our room is fairly dry, so it's pretty easy to, bathe whatever we need in reverb, and then that translate well on the mix as well.
Right.
Going to broadcast.
Great. All right, so this is the next place we're going to talk about. This is First Baptist Church of Arlington. This is their front of house position. They got 32D there. And they also have the luxury of having a monitor engineer, right, Wes? Where they have another console online there. And we're going to talk about how that gets handled here next. So I'll stop this here and we'll come back. So I'm going to bring in our next guest here. This is Mason Williams. Mason is the Director of Media at First Baptist Church of Arlington. So welcome, Mason. Good to have you here. So we're going to run you through all the same questions we went through with Wes here, obviously, and have you talk about what you're doing there. So Matt, Mason, take it away. Describe what you got going on. Tell us how you're doing it.
Matt, I'll let you go first.
Okay. So as you pointed out, they're a 3-console situation. They have 32D, I think it's a 192 engine up front, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Then a 24D with a 144. And then we are Danteing over to their broadcast room, which is right behind where he's sitting. And there's a little M32 in there. So we are creating stems from front of house, sending them back there. Their big thing was before we did, there was a retrofit. We did a remodel about 4 years ago for them. And they had a pretty strong volunteer crew mixing on an old analog console. We just needed to up the quality of what they were doing, but they're not full-time audio guys. So once again, having a good front of house guy, we're creating good sounds. So let's give the volunteers, something they can do and help bring things to a next level. So if you want to bring that back up, Robert, I don't remember what all we're doing there, but I think there's like drum stem, bass is separate. And actually the funny thing is, because we're coming off of, there's actually a very large, it's actually a 3-rack system, but most of the stems from them are coming off the first rack, off of the Dante card, and we didn't have room for bass. So bass is actually coming from the monitor console and not from front house. So they're doing a left-right stem, bass, then mono, like a percussion mix, acoustic, electrics, have a few things in stereo to help them get some width for the stream. So keys, they're getting vocals, a mix of vocals with effects, and all those have all the effects, front of house effects. So like the drums have the drum reverbs on them, all those kind of things. The choir, and then there's a few things that they get that front of house doesn't get. They have a I don't remember what the thing costs, but $1 million electronic organ that we've actually mic'd up. That goes to them. So they have actually, behind the main clusters, there's actually some mics that are trying to pick up the organ. And then inside where the bass cabinets are for the low end, there's actually some 421s in there that feed them. Then what we're doing from them, they actually send that back to front of house, and we don't ever bring organ itself into the room, but we do put a little bit of reverb and try to give some space. So their challenge there was that they do two different services. One's a contemporary with a full band, drums, bass, guitars, the whole thing. And then they have another one that's orchestral. So from an acoustic standpoint, we had to try to find sort of a middle ground between being able to do orchestral music in there and do modern worship. So for the string section, it's probably a little bit more dry than we want, and it's a little bit more wet for the for the contemporary. So we actually bring the organ back into the house PA and then kind of sweeten it up from a reverb. And the funny, not to get sidetracked, but the first time we did this on opening weekend, there were a bunch of people in the room, and the lady was up there playing the organ. She does her whole thing. She hits the last note, takes her hands off of the organ, and people in the room literally gasped. They were like, oh my gosh, what is that? So anyway, that was sidetracked. So they have organ, and then they also, which I'm a big fan of, they also bring all of the video returns. So any playback, graphics, things, anything that has audio, they actually submix and send back to everybody else. If there's a video running, I don't want to have to know if it's VTR 1 or 10. I just want to turn up video. So usually your broadcast person's in proximity of the video control room, and they're going to probably know what's going on. So they actually submix all of the video stuff and send it back to front house. So that's kind of what's going on there.
So I think it's fair to say that's a little more complex than you might have imagined when we talk about just sending some stems to the broadcast room and having them kind of, reblend them and kind of optimize the balances for stream, right? You guys got a lot going on in there in that stream mix.
Yeah. And some of that was just driven to have the volunteers, have a little bit of control and feel like they're contributing. But yeah, we're breaking up as much as we can within reason.
So Wes, tell us about, Mason, excuse me, tell us about your side of it here. How is this? I mean, obviously this takes this off your shoulders to a degree, right? But obviously the stems are still a submix of the front of house, so a subset of the front of house. So you're still involved. How much communication is going on between you two guys, et cetera? Here, give us some insight into the daily workflow there.
Right. It's actually surprisingly, it works really well. As kind of like what Matt was referring to earlier, as long as you have a good warm body at front of house, you're going to get a pretty decent stem mix. There is quite a bit of processing on our end. We don't usually do it to the two mix. We do it individually to each stem to brighten things up a little bit from what we have in the room. But outside of that, very rarely do I have to call front of house and say, hey, we need more electric or whatever. But it works really, really well. And it doesn't take a lot from the actual broadcast engineer to get a good sound, because every broadcast engineer that we use is a volunteer. And right. Actually one of our sort of golden people that reside in this position almost from week to week has no background in audio at all. They're very noobish in that, but they have good ears. And so anytime they need help or anything like that, usually I'm the guy that will go help them or polish something up. But outside of that, it's a pretty solid system. Nice. Really surprised me.
And part of the goal there is to put the volunteers in a place where they can succeed and they feel good about what's going on. You don't want to, they honestly, with the old system, when they had full control, they weren't succeeding very often.
No.
And now they do.
Well, not to go off off on a sidetrack here. We talked about this in the run up to this webinar. I started deploying this concept on tours. Probably, I don't know, maybe it wasn't long after VENUE came out, I started doing this. when we would, like, if we were on Big Concert Tour and we would pull into a festival where, you know, I mean, you're going to pull up to a festival, they're going to take a full input split and also try to mix it for broadcast, you know, and it was just failing horribly, you know. It's like, it's one thing to have a multi-track it for rebroadcast later, remix later and rebroadcast. But we started thinking, man, this is crazy. There's got to be a better way to do this. So we started sending stems. And it, you know, it was kind of supporting the concept of using audio subgroups that I was promoting at the time, et cetera. But, you know, we would bring out Ryan Uliate, who was the guy that mixed and engineered the record. He would be in the truck. We would send him the stems from the front of house console, which had all the moves, everything in it. And he would just reblend it for the broadcast. We'd give him the vocals separately. He could deal with vocals separately, but all the music stems there. And it worked just fabulously. I mean, it was the quality of the mixes going out when you were pulling up with really no sound checks. I mean, you know, there was no place there. I mean, you were going to get a line check in the truck and then try to broadcast it. You know, it was like, that's not going to work, you know?
Right.
So this, you know, this is kind of the proof in the pudding of that, you know, the proof point of that concept. And it's a very effective one when it's done correctly, you know. So you guys are proving it here. You guys kind of doing even an expanded version of that here. So
yeah, it really is. And Matt, I don't know if you remember when we first decided to do sort of the STEM solution, the volunteers weren't happy because, as Matt referred to earlier, they had full control over it before and they weren't succeeding. But now, you know, a few years later, that's hardly ever mentioned anymore. And one of the reasons that we actually did that was because we didn't have the budget to get another SXL. So, yeah.
You do have infrastructure.
there's total infrastructure. And so it works really well.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Awesome. Well, you know, let's just kind of go through the pluses and minuses of this here. I think hopefully everybody can see it here. Certainly one of the pluses is that you now have a person who is dedicated to monitoring and mixing the stream. Even though they're doing it in a group mix sort of thing, that person can be 100% focused on the stream quality, right? So it begs the question, Mason, are you doing any kind of mastering processing on the output of your M32 there?
Very little. And that's probably the weakest link for us. We are running a precision limiter on the output and it works pretty well. It works really well to kind of glue the mix together whenever we're actually doing music. And then it's kind of a lifesaver when it comes to the more, you know, the voices, the spoken word things. It helps us kind of level it off a little bit. The problem with that is that our volunteers aren't up to snuff on actually how to run it, you know, all the time. And so that's one thing where
let me give you a news flash. The whole industry is not up to snuff on running that yet. So, you know, I mean, we'll talk about that toward the end here of how to get these mixes optimized for actual streaming. But, you know, just getting the audio to the stream is the first part, and then getting it optimized in terms of level. That's a whole nother science in and of itself. So it is. So, you know, we try to stay on top of it as much as we can, but a lot of the times on Sundays I'm running around and I can't stand over their shoulder the whole time. But sure. It works well. Well, but I think the point of it is you got somebody there monitoring the stream the whole time, you know.
Correct.
And you know, I'll just ask this kind of tweaky question: are they actually looking, ever listening or looking at the back side of the stream, at the delivery side, or are they only looking at the send side?
Right. No, we actually have a group of people in our communications department that does that. They monitor the streams, they monitor the chat. So if there's ever any issues, and then of course we run. It's just hard to listen when you've got, you know, stuff blasting through the tannoys and you've got all this other stuff in the room, but we do try to log in, check the stream at the very first, make sure we've got audio, levels look good, all that stuff. So yeah.
Great.
It works pretty well.
Yeah. So obviously, as I said, the big plus of this is the ease of it. You know, it's, you know, you have a more dedicated person, et cetera, but you know, some of the minuses, which you just have to consider and weigh it out, what is going to work best for your facility is you do need more people now. You need another person that's capable of doing that. You're going to need another mixer. You know, you can kind of decide on the scale or the cost of the mixer that you're going to use in this workflow. It can be a lesser skilled person, you know, that can be used here, et cetera. I kind of have to characterize this as a minus, only kind of to stay legal here. You know, one of the downsides to it is that it's still a subset of the front of house mix. So if you have a poor front of house mix, or you're in a situation where it's mix minus at front of house, this may not be the total solution for you. You're going to have to work harder to get that stem solution to work for you there. So really, again, it kind of requires somebody competent at front of house and doing a good front of house mix to begin with, or at least building all these stems.
Yes.
It's going to require additional audio transport infrastructure. You guys said you're kind of infrastructure rich there, so it worked out good for you. But it does take all of those things. And so I would say, we didn't really talk about this in the first scenario, but I think you have to categorize it as a minus in this context, is that by doing it this way, you don't have the ability really to do sweetening and any work on it after the stream, right? It's kind of a live only. Right. Although I would say I've been promoting this idea to a lot of people recently, and I'm surprised how many people have picked up and run with it. So for instance, maybe a front of house engineer misses a vocal move or something like that. You can use virtual sound check now to go back and punch in on a 2-track recording if it's all done in the same DAW. So if you're recording Pro Tools at front of house, you're also recording a 2-track mix. Guy misses a vocal move. Well, just go back previous to that place, make the vocal move and punch in on the 2-track mix. And you can actually do some sweetening to that. You could also rebalance some audience, all kinds of things back to that 2-track print, given that you can work in virtual sound check now. So it's something to consider. Even if you were doing that at the stem level, you could do that as well. You could, print a 2 mix at the same time and then punch in on it if you need to. We're in digital now. You can do that. In analog, that would have been much, much tougher. But in digital, you can get away with that. Matt, anything you want to add to that workflow before we move on to the last one?
No, I think we've covered it. I mean, again, it's just, you have to know one, the skill set of your people, and then all audio is compromise and some,
it is just managing your trade-offs.
Yeah. And you just kind of have to know what the skills of the people that you have and their facilities, and there's all kinds of things that can affect that. In Mason's case, there is a lot of live instruments in there, especially on the orchestral. Mm-hmm. We are doing sound reinforcement. It is in the PA, but we're making it bigger than life, and not, if you turn it off, it's still pretty loud in there. We're just making it better. Yeah. So that may or may not translate really well. And in that case, you wouldn't want just your 2 mix. So what they're doing allows you to kind of put it back together. Where Wes is, we have pretty much all controlled. Drums are in a cage. It's all IEMs. It sounds fantastic. But if you're in a smaller room, you got live drums in there, well, now you got a problem.
Yep. All right. Well, let's move on to this third scenario while we still have a little bit of time here, and we'll get through this pretty quick, I think. I'm going to go back to the screen share here for a second, and we'll get this next thing up here. Let's see here. So I believe, let's see here. There we go. So this is what we're going to talk about is a little bit theoretical here or hypothetical here in terms of, we don't have an actual case study here for it. This is just a template that I use for designing up these kind of discrete systems for people that are going to put them in play. I would say to you without question, there are lots of these systems in play now in the world. Ever since the release of VENUE 7.0, where we started supporting and qualifying 3 consoles sharing the same I/O. So this is a situation that is actually doable today and is going into more churches than I want to talk about, really. So, Matt, I think you mentioned you guys have considered this, or you have this in play for a church. Is it in Texas?
Yeah, it's in the DFW area. The Met we just did, they've got a 3 console setup similar to this. I believe they're 32D at front of house and 24s at monitors and broadcast, but they're a full split star configuration. The whole thing. We've also done similar things, which I'm sure you'll touch on. We've done similar things and just done DAW mixing in Pro Tools.
Yeah, well, I'll just go ahead and go to it here. you know, because with the system now, and certainly with S6 in play, you can add you know, an S6, S4, S1 control surface and actually take mixing control, kind of mix in the box
Right.
of a Pro Tools system that is on that network, right? So if somebody wants to mix inside Pro Tools and do DAW mixes for the stream, they can certainly do that here as well. You know, that's not uncommon. There are a lot of broadcasters in the world that do that very thing today. So,
Well, again, knowing your people, the one we just did, which is Fielder Church, their broadcast engineer is a really great studio engineer. He's also a professor at Dallas College, and that's his workflow. He's Mr. Pro Tools, so that's how they ended up doing it. He mixes out in the box.
Right.
Live.
Right. So it's worth pointing out on the unified platform concept here that any of these consoles, excluding the S4, S6, X1, the 48D, the 32D, a 24D, a 24C, 16C, can be used in any location here. Matter of fact, you could swap them out at any point. You could just move the 16C to the front of house position and the 48D to the broadcast if you wanted to do it with no penalty at all. So, you know, it's a really, really flexible system. You can, you know, add IO, add all kinds of concepts here without any penalty here to the system. It actually operates as one big giant system. So you can have, you know, obviously a person at front of house, person at monitors, and a person at broadcast doing on air and post mixing for on demand and rebroadcast. So obviously the flexibility of this and the capability of this is kind of unmatched. You know, you can, there's nothing you really cannot do with this. But obviously, again, it requires qualified people to do this. You know, you need somebody who understands DAW mixing or understands on-air mixing. If they're like in this situation, if they were going to do the on-air mix at the 16C and then do all the post work on the S6 or S4, you know, they need to be pretty well versed in both of those kind of things, whether they're going to run in snapshot automation or run in runtime automation for post. They got to be pretty well versed in that to be able to handle it and handle it competently.
And talented as an engineer. That's a very unique skill set.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, somebody that can do both of those mindsets, certainly. But, you know, I see this, matter of fact, we're dealing with a church down in the South right now that has this very situation in play where, you know, their broadcast room also works as a recording studio where, you know, their worship leader, their band members, all those stuff, all those players go in and actually create content, you know, recorded content for streaming, you know, of audio, CDs, all kinds of stuff. So it works as a studio, and then on the weekends it turns to broadcast and is literally just mixing the stream. So those musicians move from the studio out to the stage, and it just translates beautifully going right out to the stream. So it's a pretty intense but really, really great workflow, you know. So this kind of stuff is possible now with Venue 7 and with full StarPoint three-way share and input sharing and gain tracking. Pretty exciting time, man. It's pretty cool stuff. All right. So maybe just some pluses and minuses there. We'll go through that if you want to do it. You know, the pluses of that obviously are focus, right? You're going to have complete broadcast quality focus on the stream of your audio. You know, another nice plus that comes from that kind of setup is you know, you could easily support surround formats. If you wanted to stream out in 5.1, you wanted to stream out in any kind of surround format, you could easily do it. It's all of those systems in that situation, be it front of house, monitors, or broadcast, are virtual sound check capable. You know, the broadcast area is available for overdubs and remixes and all kinds of stuff. As I mentioned, it supports both snapshot and runtime automation, etc. The minuses, obviously, really, they should be pretty obvious to everybody, but, you know, obviously it's the most complex in terms of interface, no doubt about it, compared to the others. It's going to require the most resources to put together a dedicated space and dedicated, you know, room in your facility. It's going to have dedicated audio transport infrastructure, and again, going to require some pretty highly skilled people to do that. But boy, there's a lot of that going on in this world today, man. I'm telling you, this is not uncommon. Not uncommon. All right. So I think that brings us pretty close to the end here. Anything you guys want to add? Are you going to have any closing comments? I'd love to get a closing comment from all of you guys. So then we'll jump to the Q&A.
Wes, you got anything?
You're on the spot, Wes.
Not necessarily, other than just I feel like
I was just saying maybe I'll bait you with something. How do you? I mean, considering that you know all of the different workflows that are possible here, how do you feel about what you do? I mean, are you feeling like, well, boy, I wish I could do this, et cetera, or you just feel really strongly that the way you're doing it is totally perfect for what you guys are doing?
I would say it's pretty much perfect for what we're doing. It's hard to think about a scenario where we would have the fortune of being able to hire somebody who can do it better than what we're doing from front of house.
Yeah.
And then also invest in additional infrastructure and a space for that console to sit. It would require another full-time salary, another control surface, and a room in order for that person to then sit and listen and critique well. So it's a big investment.
And
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to, and for them, I mean, if you go listen to that stream, it's pretty legit. I mean, like I was saying earlier, and knowing your client and everything, but the person that's going to take what Wes is doing to the next level is a very specific, very talented person to take it to the next level. It's not perfect, but that next step is a huge investment from where they are now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know that they would really benefit into cost analysis to see how much better it's going to get. Right. I think his streams are better than most of the stuff that's out there.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
This is really church specific, but I think it's really something to be considered strongly by anybody. And I think any church should invest in the live space first. And I say that because locally, your churches, this is our philosophy at the Village. We're ministering to our local context. And then the stream is the plus. It's the cherry on top. We love that our content is blessing and benefiting others outside of our walls. But we've literally shrunk our church so that way we can be intentional with our local context. And so that's why this works out really, really well for us. That's part of it, at least.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great wrap up there. That's what I was looking for, Wes.
Okay, great.
Hey, Mason, how about you, man? How you feeling about it?
Yeah, I would say ditto to all that. The console itself sounds great. And really from input to output to the stream itself, I mean, I can't recommend it enough. There's a lot of flexibility there. There's even been some times where we might have a special event and maybe we kind of have to redo or rethink how we're actually sending the stems, just depending on what's going on the stage. And it's very flexible. You get, instant response for what you're needing to hear. And so it's great. I mean, I'm very happy with it. And like I said, there was some trepidation sort of department-wide on, is this going to work? Is the STEM idea going to work? Because there is a big difference between live sound and broadcast sound, A4V, all that stuff. And you would never know it. I mean, because the tweaks that we have to make on our end in broadcast are so minor. So it's great. We love it.
Awesome. Well, Matt, I'm gonna put the hard question on you.
Yeah, go ahead.
How do you feel that VENUE and kind of the unified platform concept has empowered you to do all this kind of stuff with these churches? Why do you stick with it? Why do you choose it?
There's a lot of reasons. I've been mixing on Avid consoles since it was digitized. I started on the D Show version 1. I came from PM1D before that.
Yeah.
And I just think that, especially the SXL, there's a cost side of it in that I just think it's the best value of any console that's on the market right now. In my opinion, you're playing with even the largest SXL. You know, if you're talking about a console that costs $80,000, I think you're playing it with people that are in the $120,000, $130,000, $150,000 market, without naming names. And then it's just a matter of preferences. But from a church standpoint, the sonic quality of it is as high as you're going to get, no matter if you bought the entry-level console or you bought a 3-rack, control surface, the whole thing. It's the same. It's the same.
Yeah.
So just from a value standpoint, I just don't think there's anything else that can touch it. I've had a really long relationship with Avid. Customer support has always been amazing. If we very seldom have problems, but when we have, I've had issues where something's come up and the next morning I have boxes of parts going, we're not exactly sure what's going on, but these are all the things it could be. And we'll figure this out, and then you can send back, we'll figure out what the money thing later.
Yeah.
Well, that's the kind of response I want, right? So that's huge. And then just from a user interface standpoint, and for me, and I would say Wes too, if you're going to be doing automation, if you're going to be doing snapshots, my opinion is there's other consoles that can do things maybe that are more complicated, but most of the time when I'm on those consoles, I don't want to say I'm afraid of the automation, but I'm more hesitant to go, okay, I want to do this thing, because if I have to make a change later, I've already missed my opportunity. It's too cumbersome. I never think twice on Avid consoles. If I need to do, 3 scenes for that song, then I just do it, because I know if I need to make a change, it's that fast. So from a usability, I think it's very easy for volunteers or for the highest level engineers out there. It just matches up with us really well. It's good workflows. It's especially with version 7. What do you want it to do? It pretty much can do it. You want to do bus to bus, it'll do it. So the flexibility, stability. I mean, it's my choice. There's a lot of consoles out there, competitors, but I just think you've got to hand up on them, and especially from a cost standpoint. It's a lot. It's considerably tens of thousands of dollars cheaper for the same thing from other manufacturers.
Right.
So.
Well, my goodness, thank you for that. I mean, I don't think I could have asked for a more ringing endorsement there. So thank you so much. And I'll just take this opportunity to say thank you for being such a longtime supporter of the platform there. So always glad to chat with you and check in with you guys. I was thrilled that we were going to get to do something together here. So great. All right. Well, fellas, thank you very much for checking in and participating in this today. We're going to jump to some questions and answers if we've got anything in the background there. I haven't been really following it in the chat here. I'll bring in Chant here.
How's it going, everybody? There are a couple of things. First of all, the thing that I took away from all this is never stop educating yourself and always keep working towards better mixes.
Yeah,
That's kind of the key takeaway is no matter how good you are, you can always be better, and you can always learn new things. Matt, a question for you. Give us a little bit background on Epic, where it came from, how you started it. And the other thing I'd like to know is, like, if a client contacts you, what's the process you go through to kind of best determine what they're looking for and how to help them through their needs?
Well, Epic was started by Brandon Shanoff about, 17 years ago. He was a worship leader, and he'll admit this. He was a worship leader that really couldn't sing that well, but he really had a knack for production. And so we started Epic. I was actually, Brandon used to work for me when I was at Fellowship Church. He was one of my broadcast engineers. And then when it was time for me to leave there, I ended up working for him. So he used to work for me. Now I work for him. We are, well, we say we're an experience design company for worship environments. I always, my whole thing, I'll give a little bit of history of me so that can kind of give some history. When I was growing up, I remember sitting in church and listening to church services and going, something's not right. Like the mix was weird. I didn't know that much. I just knew something wasn't right, which kind of set me on a path of why I do what I do within churches. And I always had a saying, if you can't hear it, you can't hear it. Meaning if you can't hear the message, then you can't communicate that message. So for me, sound has been priority over all other things in worship environments. Not that lighting isn't important, not that video isn't important, but from a corporate worship standpoint, some of the best worship experiences I've ever had have been around a campfire with a bunch of people singing. So though Epic does great lighting, we do all these other great things, that going to what Wes was saying, your room, what's happening in that room is paramount to communicating that message. So Epic we are known for our acoustic designs. We have he's quite brilliant acoustician. We're known really for acoustics and sound system design in worship context. So does that help?
No, that's perfect. Yeah, I just wanted kind of a little bit background of what where you came from and what you guys do and how you interact with your clients. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, as far as our process, when we spend, that's usually Brandon. He's very good at understanding the vision of a church. Almost everyone that is on staff at Epic is either currently or has served on church staffs. So we understand ministry. Me, I've been on church staff. I've been in the touring world in Christian music. So we really do understand what it takes to create that environment. But Brandon's usually that guy, or another guy named Andy, that gets with you and really tries to see what your vision and try to understand what your vision is so that we can help you achieve that.
Awesome. For Wes and Mason, moving to streaming, what was the most difficult part for you guys to get over with the streaming?
Sure. Well, historically, we were a never stream church. We had fiber lines to our other campuses, and we would just send sermon audio and crowd mics to those campuses. And then since we've scaled back and we're back down to autonomous campuses and just us locally now as the village church, it was really figuring out the video aspect of it, because audio already sounded great going to the two bus. And so once we started to bring into the consumer backend sort of idea of it, and knowing that we still wanted to translate and put some ears on that, my conversation with Matt and some other guys that I trust from an audio perspective, I would receive feedback from them. And so, okay, we need more harmonic distortion on the bass to make it translate through a pair of TV speakers a little better. So, that could have been an SPL plugin on bass, or it could have been using Heat on version 7 or whatever that looks like. And just that back and forth, really all it was communication with people that know me and know what I'm trying to accomplish, but then also know what we're trying to do in the room, and that give and take there. And so it wasn't really that hard because we already had a good result. It was just taking what we were doing and massaging it a little bit more to turn it into what it is now. I don't know if that's too vague, but that's really what it looked like for us.
Great. And Mason?
I'm sorry, you'll have to repeat the question. I got a phone call that I wasn't expecting.
No worries.
Sorry about that.
I guess the question really is, what was the most difficult stage or thing to overcome in doing the streaming or bringing your streaming up to the level it is now?
You know, honestly, I would say there wasn't any difficulty once we had the Avid infrastructure. Prior to that, it was a mess. It was all analog. It wasn't maintained, I guess, up until that point. But now that we're at this point, I would say that the most difficult thing that we've had to do is train volunteers, and that's been very minimal. So it's been pretty smooth sailing.
Awesome. That's pretty much it for questions.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Thanks for chiming in there, Chant. Appreciate it. Thanks. All right, guys. Well, I'll take that cue then to pull the ripcord here. Thank you very, very much for tuning in today. Stay tuned. We obviously have these webinars in the works and planned all the time. So thank you for stopping by today and checking it all out. If you have further questions on this, you can certainly reach out to us on Facebook, on any of the groups, any of the social media platforms to reach out for questions, etc. You can reach me, Chant, any of the Avid staff that way. With Matt and Matt, have you guys posted any communication paths for you guys? You want to post one here? Somebody wants to get in touch with you?
Sure. You can go to our. We don't really have a website. We're pretty much word of mouth. We don't do how. And that's purposeful. But you can go to epicresourcegroup.com, and there are contact numbers and ways to email us or call us. Call us there, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, once again, guys, thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate you sharing what you're doing. It's a pretty exciting time. So thanks again for doing that. Everybody else, we'll see you next time on the next Venue Live Sound webinar. Take care. Be good out there. Be safe. Be healthy. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.